Story 1. What was the most entitled parent you have ever seen in your life? I'll start. We ran into a teenager who had been in a bad motor vehicle accident. The patient's blood pressure was bad, and on top of that, he was having trouble breathing due to an anxiety attack. My paramedic was starting an intravenous line on him to give him some kind of medication that was supposed to help the blood pressure, while I was starting a 4-lead and a 12-lead electrocardiogram. These are stickers we put on your body that allow us to take a picture of your heart. Enter the entitled mother. Excuse me, did I say that you could treat my child? The entitled mother asked in that annoying, entitled voice. She would be right, generally speaking. For all minors, unless the child is literally on death's doorstep and there is no parent or guardian to be found, you have to get consent from the parent or guardian to treat the child. However, that only applies to kids from newborn to 17 years old. This child is 18. Ma'am, your child is 18. He already signed the consent form for treatment and transport. I'm going to have to politely ask you to step out of my ambulance, I said. I understand a parent being worried about her of-age kid when they are in a medical emergency. Most of the time, if I feel that having a family member in the truck with us will be beneficial to the patient's mental health, I will have them ride with us in the passenger seat up front to the hospital. But the second a family member steps into my ambulance and starts causing stress for my patient, that's when I draw the line because we have to worry about the patient, not the patient's family. The entitled mother grunted and then slammed the ambulance door shut. I thought that was the end of it, so we continued to care for the patient. My paramedic pushed his medication, and the patient's blood pressure finally started to lower. All right, I feel comfortable transporting. Now let's get him to hospital name I won't say because of privacy laws. As I stepped out of the ambulance and closed the door, I saw the entitled mother walking back up to the ambulance, this time with a state trooper. Sir, she says that y'all are treating her child without consent. Is this true? The state trooper asked me. I told the state trooper that the guy was 18 years old and had already signed consent for treatment and transport. The state trooper talked to my paramedic, looked at the guy's ID and the signed form, and then started getting out of the ambulance. So, are they letting my kid go? I heard her ask. The look on her face in the side view mirror as I put the truck in gear and drove off, leaving her there, was priceless. At the end of the day, as far as I know, the hospital got the patient's vitals stable, and he got discharged the next morning. This wasn't the end of it, though. This entitled mother actually dug deep enough and got my supervisor's phone number the next day. This man had to go back through the call logs and check that the consent form was signed and the hospital paperwork I scanned into the patient care report that showed his birthday, confirming he was 18 years old. I passed by my supervisor when he was doing this, and the only words out of his mouth were Karens. Story 2. To give people a picture of myself at the time this happened, I worked for the state dealing with public benefits and assistance programs, such as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and Medicaid. I'm 6 feet 2 inches tall. I used to be a powerlifter, and I weigh 340 pounds. So yeah, I'm a big guy. The dress code for the state is business casual unless you are working at the central office or a public-facing position. I worked on the phones 90% of the time. On the day in question in 2018, I was wearing the one and only suit I own. Being the size that I am, the suit is tailored. Now, this was a few years ago, so some things will be paraphrased as my memory is faulty due to a few too many blows to the head in my youth. I am the dungeon master for a Dungeons & Dragons game every Thursday at a friend's house. I was in my late 30s, and as I was leaving work, my friend called me and asked if I could pick him up some new dice, as his 3 dogs decided that his dice looked like treats. So, I hit a local game store on my way to his place. While I was there, I noticed a frustrated young woman trying to convey something to the owner. She was using American Sign Language, the only other language I understand other than English. I tapped her on the shoulder and signed to her to see if I could help her out. She explained that she was looking into getting into Dungeons & Dragons with some of her deaf friends from school. So I asked her some questions and found that they had never played. But due to the success of Critical Role, they wanted to try, and she was going to be the dungeon master. I helped her get everything she would need for new players, and she was just so happy that someone could help her out using American Sign Language. She thought it was really thoughtful of the owner to learn. I explained to her that she had been working with the owner when I got there, and that I was just an avid Dungeons & Dragons fan and a dungeon master myself. and that I was just stopping in for some dice. She looked at me confused and signed. "So you don't work here?" I replied. "Nope, I just wanted to help since I know sign language." We laughed. So, back to getting dice. That's when the entitled mother strikes. She starts yelling at the owner of the store, wanting to know why the owner was spending all his time helping the cute young woman but could not be bothered to help an elderly customer who just wanted to get her grandchild a video game. This game store does not sell video games. Now let's paint a picture of the entitled mother. She is about 5 feet tall, with a standard Karen haircut, maybe 240 pounds, and in her early 40s. If she has a grandchild who can play video games, some poor choices may have been made in her past. The actual owner of the store said, "I help people who come to the counter, and if they need help with something out on the store floor, I help them as best as I can." Then the entitled mother points at me and says, "No, I'm talking about the owner." The actual owner of the store and I look at each other and at the same time say, "Lady, I do not work here, and he is the owner. This place does not sell video games." We smile at each other. This is where the entitled mother explodes, asking why a game store does not sell video games and what she is supposed to do now. She waddles over to me and starts poking me in the chest, ranting something along the lines of, "You should be nicer to older customers. They are the ones keeping your store open." At this point, I pull out my state employee badge and point at it and say real slow, "Lady, I don't work here." I then explained that by state and federal law, by poking me in the chest, she was guilty of assault. At this point, she sputtered and then slapped me. When I started to talk again, she slapped me again. At this point, I got ticked off. I stood to my full height and yelled at the top of my lungs that if she touched me one more time, I would defend myself, and she would not like the results. At this point, the owner had called the police and had the phone on speaker. We all heard when dispatch stated that the officer was 2 minutes out. She screamed and then tried to slap me again. I caught her by the wrist, spun her around, and pinned her hand to her back. I grabbed her other hand and held both her hands behind her back and at arm's length so that she couldn't kick me in the shins. This is when the police showed up. Now, when you have a guy standing a foot plus taller holding a screaming woman at bay, cops are automatically going to think that you are in the wrong. Officer 1 was a lady, and Officer 2 was a guy. Officer 1 came in first and saw this and said, "Sir, please let go of the woman." I said, "I will as long as she won't hit me again." The entitled mother started going off, saying how I hit her and that she was just defending herself and that I needed to be arrested. Officer 2, hearing this, pulled his taser and said, "Man, you need to let her go now." I let her go and raised my hands to head level. The entitled mother spun around, kicked me, and then slapped me again. The owner of the shop said, "That's the third and fourth time she has assaulted that customer." Officer 1 then placed the entitled mother in cuffs and escorted her out to the car. Officer 2 was a short guy, about 5 feet 8 inches tall or so. Still pointing the taser at me and wanting to cuff me, I explained that was not going to happen as my wrist is too big for his cuffs, and that he would need zip cuffs, and that he needed to call a sergeant if he was actually going to try and arrest me. Officer 2 stepped back and said, "Are you resisting arrest?" I said, "No, but I will be exercising my rights to a lawful investigation prior to arrest. You know, proven innocent until guilty, and that stuff, as I was the one defending myself from being assaulted by that screaming woman your partner just took outside. Now, if you want me cuffed while you determine what's going on so you feel safe, I fully agree to that. I'm just explaining that my wrist won't fit your metal cuffs." Officer 1 came back in and said that the entitled mother had been detained and was demanding a supervisor. The store owner piped in with his side of the story. Officer 2 still pointing a taser at me and explained that the entitled mother had assaulted me twice and was in the process of assaulting me a third time before I had restrained her. At this point, Officer 2 put his taser away and then jokingly asked if he could see if the cuffs really wouldn't fit. I held out my right hand, and he pulled out his cuffs and was like, "Wow, they won't fit." For everyone's information, the minimum inside perimeter of the bracelet is 7.9 inches 20 centimeters when the ratchet is engaged at the first notch. The maximum perimeter is 6.5 inches 16 centimeters when the ratchet is engaged at the last notch. My wrist is around 10 inches. Officers 1 and 2 were both amazed that the cuffs would not actually fit me, and that even if they did, due to my size, they would not be able to cuff me behind the back. At this time, the sergeant showed up. He walked in, saw me, and said, "Hey, Rusty, long time no see." I replied, "Hey, Sarge." Long story shorter, the entitled mother was arrested for assault, and yes, I pressed charges. From what I was told by the sergeant, this was her 12th incident for similar issues, but the first time she got violent with someone. Yay, lucky me. Story 3. My ex-wife and I were standing in line at the airport of our honeymoon destination, waiting to get checked in and return home. There was quite a bit of a line already, but we were lucky enough to find ourselves near the front of it. When there was only one couple in front of us, two fancy-looking ladies think Hyacinth Bucket marched in between the two lines to the front and smugly stood between the lines, being sure their important looks would get them served first. They tried to cut in front of the couple ahead of us, but the young couple was quicker and was able to block the older ladies from their path with a surfboard and got checked in. The looks thrown left and right to everyone around from these ladies were dripping with contempt for the young couple and everyone else in line. The two praying mantises, at this point, started eyeballing me and my ex-wife because we were now their competition for the 2-meter dash to the desk. They ever so slightly started shuffling forward to get a bit closer. At this point, the accumulated stress of traveling and my lack of patience with entitled people was getting the better of me. So I asked what they thought they were doing and told them that the back of the line was, well, at the back of the line. The head Karen, although perfectly capable of understanding and speaking English, resorted to saying a few demeaning-sounding things in her Slavic language and proceeded to look me up and down like a piece of garbage. Now, don't get me wrong, I am a piece of garbage, but that doesn't mean she gets to look at me with that much disgust. So, instead of continuing the non-existent conversation in English, I switched to my dialect so she could have a taste of her own medicine. I calmly said a few choice sentences to her, carefully picking my words to make it sound as horrible as possible, fully realizing that only my ex-wife could understand me, and that my dialect sounds like someone having a horrible stroke. This seemed to make the secondary Karen realize it wasn't worth it, and she, kind of ashamed, started tugging on the head Karen's sleeve to move to the back of the line. Some more things were said by her, and some more dirty looks were thrown, but they retreated to the end of the line, and we got checked in. I was sitting in the plane's middle row, aisle seat, and who walks in? The two Karens. We spotted each other, glares from her, grins from me, and it turns out head Karen's seat was the one behind me. From the moment we were off the ground, I reclined my seat all the way back. I had dinner like an ancient Roman. If only they could have hung my meal from the ceiling so I could have picked it like grapes off a vine. 4 hours into the flight or so, my back started to hurt, but I knew I wasn't going to let it stop me. I'd just stretch it out, unlike her legs, and sit out the remaining 2 hours of the flight. No looks were given by her when we left the plane, and as someone who never reclines their seat, I felt like a boss for having gone through with it all the way to the end. Petty, but worth it.